to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, show number 424. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us on our TV station that's located on Roku TV, Samsung TV, LG TV, Apple TV, Google TV, Amazon TV, and I think I got them all. Anyway, thank you so much for doing so. You get to see my bright and cheery, smiley, happy face there for it. If you're joining us on our simulcasted channels of Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, or Twitch, thank you for joining us there as well. And of course, on our 24/7 radio station, we broadcast also our live show. No, we're connected to it too. Sorry. Doing it live for our live shows on Fridays at 11:30 a.m. there as well. So thank you very much for joining us. I think we're in a total of 209 countries now. And for the replay of the shows at different time zones for everyone, we do translate into 10 additional languages. So thank you all so very much for watching and asking questions and giving feedback and generally participating with the idea that we've been doing this now. We're now in our 10th year of doing this weekly, both the live show and the podcast. So thank you so very much for your continued support and engagement with us. And for those that make comments at hdm.news/talkback, thank you for the comments. And I will be using some of the context of what you said today in today's show, which is our topic of today, is a bit of a conclusion of a series of conversations we've had these past 3 shows. And actually, retrospectively, there's a couple of shows prior to that, like 418 and 417, which kind of address some of the flip side of the coin of some of these topics. So our fourth in the series, what we've been currently doing, the topic today is about an advanced way to produce a proper marketing budget with the usage of GA4. Now, why I say it's in the fourth in the series, if we go back to last week's show, 423, we talked about the problem with lifetime value, how it's not getting used, and it's at and it's the core of today's analytics, which is GA4 discussion in relationship to that. Live show number 422 was very specific about how to calculate projected revenue gains in hospitality marketing, which was trying to create the differentiator between forecasting and modeling, which are 2 distinct aspects of things. We're very familiar with forecasting, or more familiar with forecasting, but not as familiar with modeling. Okay. And then when we go back to live show 421, we talked about how to stress test your marketing budget, which was one of the first indications of on the negative side of the budgeting process that we're dealing with, that as we go through the progression, since we are in budget season, obviously, and it starts late July, early August, where we do gather the data and the sources of data and the references that we use. And of course, our historical forecasts as well, our historical budget projections, and of course, our actuals and so forth. That process gets started. And so our show 421 started then the catalyst of the discussion of, well, if that's the case, once you've constructed what you think is the durability of your strategy, how much we're going to spend in marketing, how much we're going to be our strategy related to revenue management, what's our CRM strategy, what's our sales strategy, our group contribution, so forth, is to begin to stress test those things. And that is by creating variations akin to what we talk about as a test pilot, or a person that's trained as a pilot, where they infuse in a simulator these scenarios of bad or worse conditions variable to what would be a normal operation. So restricting channel contributions, or increasing channel costs, or cutting out a complete channel in its entirety, or issues related to demand to market. Stress testing the budget was where we started this series of discussion. And that was show 421. Then, as I said, as we moved into 422, we flipped the coin over to the other side, which was how to then begin to calculate the projections of revenue based on variables, taking the same modality of stress testing your budget and now inverting it to the other side, creating variations of revenue as to how those gains could be calculated, what the influencers would be, increases of channels, better conversions, lesser costs, higher demand, create that variation of projected revenue gains. Then we stepped into last week's show where we were talking very specific about gaps that don't get used in those processes. And that is the calculation of the potential revenue, the lost revenue calculations associated with lifetime value, the assessments that budget usually focuses in on strongly the cost ratios. How much does this cost compare to this? And although you do compare the revenue potential of those variations, you're more fixed on the value relationships of the cost ratio to that revenue. And most places get compared by their cost, not necessarily by the revenue potential, because revenue potential is relatively hard for people to grasp and put their head around in the sense of how do they calculate for potential revenue beyond the forecast of cost value relationships. What do I mean by this? As an example, if I know for every dollar I spend, I get $10 back, aka 10-to-1 ratio, then it's a matter of how much money do I want to put in that channel that I'm happy to get that 10-to-1 return. Now, that's an easy example because pretty much if the conditions of a dollar producing 10 are constant, it's how many dollars do I have to put in that channel? Because if I always will get $10 back, I have a gold mine. That's where I want to go all the time. The reality is, like we talked about with classes in economics in our college days, is that isn't always the case. You have laws of diminished return where that dollar doesn't actually provide the margin of 10-to-1 that it used to do at its very beginning. And it actually is costing you more for that incremental volume of business than it is the actual value of the business itself. So we have the realities of diminished value of return, and there's mathematical ways to calculate that. But everything, as I keep saying, is related to a cost revenue relationship. When that diminished value gets hit or that threshold gets met, then most people decide that that's not a channel to continue putting funds into. But when you begin to implement the value of future values of revenue forecast potentials, you start getting into a different realm of where that dollar might be worth the investment, even though the ROI, the cost value relationship, doesn't say so. And what do I mean by that? And that is the lifetime value calculations. And we went into some pretty good details about how those formulas can be used last week. We went into great details about techniques and tools actually in our podcast of last week, where we took the topic of the live show and brought it right into our podcast, which we usually do, where we talk around topics at great length on the live show here. And then we get into very granular tools and functional techniques with those tools related very similar to what the topic of our show was. So we went into that in a great deal on the podcast as well. But we're talking about cost of acquisition of a customer and calculating that, and that value proposition being used as a KPI, key performance indicator, as to our measurement of the success of campaigns. Think of it in a very simplistic, more familiar way of brand campaigns. Your value proposition of brand campaigns, first off, you're paying to be in front of the people that are already looking for you. So you've always got that argument of people like, why do we have to pay for our name when they're looking for us already? Because you need that value proposition of expanding the demand for people that may not know of your brand but get discovered and they want to do business with you. But that brand contribution is a great value proposition to you, but it also sometimes, depending upon the tier level that you're doing it, which is usually in the aspirational or the discovery phase, is not directly correlated to a good ROI. Think of what OTAs do in spending for your destination that you're a part of. They spend a lot of money to be in front of a lot of people that are still wondering where they want to go. That translation of discovery doesn't necessarily mean a booking. They're not immediately at the point of conversion. They're still looking at what they're interested in doing. And so for that reason, the value relationship of the money being spent, which is usually large because you're talking to such a large audience, you need to spend enough money to get in front of that size audience, doesn't directly translate to an ROI calculation that is sustainable. But from a lifetime value point of view, that funnel that you begin to create the interaction with, where you get in front of people, and because they may not have converted this time, the awareness that you've given them means that there may be a future value in their relationship, is a number, a value number that you should definitely use in your modalities of future value, lifetime value. Okay. So that was our last show. So this was a huge roll up as into today's show, which is an advanced way to produce a proper marketing budget with GA4. So we've talked about the value proposition of lifetime value, cost acquisition of a customer. We've talked about stress testing both sides of the perspective of both negative impacts on what you plan for and the positive impacts that you may not have planned for, but should consider the options on. Did all that. So all of those episodes from 421 forward to here we are now is where we're now wrapping this all together into a definable process of creating a proper marketing budget with the kind of data that you're able to get from GA4. Again, acronyms aside, GA4, Google Analytics version 4. It is what we transitioned to from July 1st, where we were all from GA3 to cold start, all GA4. It is as we've discussed many times, up to the July 1st date and after, a complete 180 as to how data is being done. I want to give credit to where credit is due. I'm quoting one of my team members, Aaron, when he pointed out that GA4 is not truly an analytics platform. It does moderate to average value for it, strange as it may sound. It's really a customer audience generation tool. These signals that it uses to define actions of people is its real value proposition. Its modality is not about discovering what somebody did, but better measuring what they ended up doing. So rather than following the person into the process, as we normally did with goals and events, as we characterize them in GA3 back in the Universal Analytics time, this is all about looking at all the data of everything that's being tracked, which is everything, okay? And then deciding what we want to know from it. That is a big, huge gear shift for me these past few months as I begin to put my head around how does that change how I've always done things. I'm like most for being those that involved heavily into the space is that you approach things from defining your target. Who are we wanting to talk to? Where are they located? What are they interested in? What are the influences on those decisions? And we've had great shows and talked about things like personas and customer profiles and so forth that help define those and quantify those. And I'm a big proponent and still maintain the persona marketing strategy. You have to have a target that you're fixated on what you think you're talking to based on what business you're driving from that target, that avatar, that persona, so that when you talk to your teams at the properties and you're trying to define your strategy of getting people in the door, they should see that come into reality by the very people that come in the door that they're at the front desk for. They should see the family configurations of younger parents, certain age classifications, kids at certain income levels from certain geographies, because that's who we decided we're going to chase after. That's the way it has always been. And it's still valuable and viable with the augmentation of now what GA4 provides you in the modalities of better understanding of how you can get in front of the people that you think are most relevant. Because here you're predetermining through your assessments of your engagements, your insights, your team members' feedback, and sustainably some data, which can also be self-fulfilling, because if you only pick certain data to track, you're only going to act on the data that you've gathered. So that selective data gathering process is self-fulfilling and also very limiting compared to now with GA4, all the data is collected. So it's a matter of understanding what the data is telling you. And this is where people tend to lose the continuity of how they look at the data versus how they use the data. You're looking more now in this audience generation capability of GA4 of looking to define what actions or reactions or engagements that you find valuable. Here's a very simple case of this. We get 100 people that come to your website. On average, and on most circumstances, 98 of them do absolutely nothing. 2 of them actually click on something and proceed forward. So those 98 people, okay, didn't do anything. Well, let's take the 2 people that did do something. That's normally what our marketing focuses on, is the people that actually engaged with us. Out of those 2 people, maybe one of them went to the booking engine and didn't book. Okay. Well, how does that play into what we're talking about with marketing budgets? Well, in the world of GA4, you're able to identify the 98 people and what they did or didn't do. And if they did absolutely nothing, you still have data about them. Okay. And then you have the quantity that did something but not enough. And then you had the 2 people out of the 100, the one that did more than the other 98, and then the one that actually did more than that person that went to your bookings, but they still didn't book. Well, wonder if you wanted to make a custom segment audience that says everybody that came to my website that went to my booking engine but didn't book, I want you to keep track of them. Now, what do you mean by keep track of them? Well, with the way the world works now in tracking and cookies and the lack thereof and the non-usages of them and so forth, is through their engagements of Google's capability. online, and whether or not the restrictiveness of what they allow to be, analytics to be following of people's usages. We can target a audience creation, a signal, okay, an audience from that signal that allows us to then say, this is what I'd like to do. Anybody that hits this audience that Google has identified, I don't know who they are by name or email address or anything, okay? Google knows how they are by their avatar of engagement, what they touch and do and things in the internet, because Google is so prevalent as a search engine in so many places. And some people use it. That's why they're able to know this stuff. So I'm telling Google, I want to go over and increase my frequency of ads, these particular ads, to those people that fit that criteria. Well, that seems like a highly optimistic conversion at that point. If they went as far as going to my booking engine and didn't book, that means they were right to the point of wanting to know more detail. Maybe it was rate that they were walking away from, or maybe it was just inventory type of room types they wanted to see was available for their dates of interest. But that's a whole little audience. It's not a little audience, it's a really big audience of people that fit that criteria. Now, given my same examples, what if you start adding more criteria to it? That they looked at certain inventory types, or that they looked at certain offers, or that they came from certain geographies. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting more and more particular about who you want to identify. And what makes it important about those things is that the messaging of those people changes according to the more qualifiers you have related to your divisions. So instead of just talking to the people that went to your booking engine and didn't book, which is fine and well, way better than anybody of the 98 that didn't do anything, okay? You have also the ability to say, well, what about people that are in this geography? What about these people that were interested in this inventory type? Or what's really cool is that we're interested in these certain dates, because that gets tracked too. So now you have better identifiers to make more targeted content. One of the other aspects of creating proper engagements and proper marketing, and we're going to get to the budget part here in just a few minutes, is the idea that you can change the messaging as they progressively go through the segmentations they now qualify for. So if I have a certain ad campaign that's running out there for anybody and everybody based on my generalities of wanting to make sure people discover me, and then through that, they go to my website and they acted and they were that one person that went to my booking engine but didn't book, they now enter into that. That's the cluster, that segment of audience. Okay. And then from that, I may have a different message for those people that now gets put in front of them instead of the first one that got them there. So stage two, we've had that conversation. That was back in show 422. We talked about that progressive dialogue that goes along with the marketing aspect of this. So with it, you see the fact that now they engaged or saw an ad the second time. If they engaged with that ad again, I have even more information on them. But say, for instance, that they went and acted on something that I sent them the second time. Now I have a new criteria of a new audience that they now qualify for. And now they get a third level message. So it went from I have a deal to I have this specific deal to I have this unique deal. Think of it as simple 3 stages that way. So now I have a progressive funnel, workflow funnel, engagement funnel that they are now participating in based on the qualification of the audience segment that they're landing into. That can be easily identified by geography. It can be identified by the inventory type they did or the dates that they picked. Now there's a more specific way of engaging them based on a specific interest, because those dates could be identified in my calendar as 2 event-driven dates, seasonality dates, weekend versus weekday dates, type of industry, what rates they were looking for, or whether they were for purpose of travel dates. So now I'm getting this information based on what they did, not what I think they'd want to do. But what really kicks it into a high gear is taking that information we just talked about and tying it to how we perceive who we're our business for, why we built the building, why there's bricks in the roof and everything else that we deal with as a hotel, who comes into our door. We amplify the value proposition of their actions to the ideas of what we think about them. So now we can add more things to what they're doing as engagement with us, augmented with the personas, that information that we have about our history of types of guests, the geographies of the guests, their purpose-driven travel, their considerations of travel from family or incomes or whatever. All this now comes together. Why I wanted to talk about that first is because that is beginning to create the budget process for us. Because now we're not talking about what we think we can spend based on a ratio of percentages of our gross top line revenues to the segment that's been allocated for marketing efforts, the percentage usually being 4 to 7%. And a lot of times I've seen it even lower than that. But instead of quantifying our budgets that way, we're flipping it on its head. What we're saying is we can quantify based on the success of our channels and our contributions to channels, and this is where the variety begins to get calculated out. Our paid campaigns versus our paid social campaigns versus our organic content campaigns compared to our CRM campaigns, compared to all the other variations of revenue sources, our channels, okay, our meta search, okay, all these contribution percentages and how much it costs to be on these channels. We now have a nice way of seeing through GA4, through our Google ad campaigns, our Bing ad campaigns, our meta search campaigns, how much of our cost ratio of that channel for acquisition, our cost acquisition, we talked about it last week, our cost acquisition of a customer, and say, well, this channel costs me X, that channel costs me Y. These channels, this first channel X has a 20% contribution. Channel Y has a 50% contribution. Their cost may be higher, but their conversion is higher. So we can start doing math to say if I spend this much money in channel Y and this much money in channel X for these targeted audiences I know we are getting results from because we are designating them, I can calculate how much I need to spend at that cost at the conversion values those channels represent for all these campaigns of custom audiences and everything else that we do to actually calculate what the revenue success would be of those channels based on the money I need to spend. So take our way of budgeting. We say we have to make X line top line. This is our common KPI that has been handed down to us from the ownerships that we've had fun discussions on show number 419. For I'm looking at 420. Yeah, we've talked about how budget processes work, so we're good there. The idea is once we have a goal, okay, our goal, we have to figure out how we're going to hit that goal. If we can go into the channels and historically look at what the channels produce and the cost of their production, then we can calculate the monies we need to spend in those channels at those conversions to generate the revenue we want based on the criteria of the result. Now you're saying there's like, wait a minute, revenue management does that already. Revenue management tells us what our rates are going to be and our inventory availability and so forth and what have you. And you're right. This is taking the symbiotic relationship with revenue management and marketing and sales, because we have to figure their calculated contribution to this as well, and say, okay, revenue management, I can tell you what rates, well, just back it to one second. Revenue management can tell you the rates that had been successful for the inventory type that the rates were related to based on the offers that were made, okay? We also can know through our folio what rate resistance exists geographically, chronologically. Certain rates are easy to attain in high demand season, duh. Low rates are the only thing that runs during low demand season, duh. But there's event-driven spikes, holiday-driven spikes, initiatives and promotion spikes, okay, that all have variables to that rate ability, that ability to push rate up because the demand is warranted to be able to do so. But we also have the granularity of going in and seeing geographic resistance, again, chronological resistance, calendar resistance. We can't push a $500 rate during a time of season where we run $150 rates, kind of thing. So when you infuse that into what I'm just describing as marketing initiatives, where I know my channel contributions, I know my cost of contributions and my conversions of it, I know how much money I need to spend with that chronological timeline, okay, to know that if the rate is $150 and that's the resistance rate for that time of year, and I know for geography that there is ways that some geographies are willing to spend a little bit more, like California, New York might spend a little bit more compared to some place like Iowa or Ohio. I know there's some relevance to that. Then I can calculate that at the rates that we are asking for at those times on the channels, at the contribution percentages they've historically had, for the conversions that they've had, I know how much I need to spend. And remember, don't forget, we have length of stay in there as well. Okay. and we have our historical occupancies, which gets overused, and we don't even have to use it at this point. We know how much we probably have left to sell based on historical demand. Then I know that if I spend this much money on this channel at this conversion for this contribution percentage of this channel at these IDRs for this length of stay, so I have a total acquisition value, then I know how much I need to spend as a budget line item for that channel for that time of year that I'm regulating it to generate the requested goal, revenue goal that has been assigned to that contribution time. That means marketing has, if not more, influence on your budgeting cycle than the revenue calculations from revenue management on defining how they are going to strategize their rate offerings and the hopeful occupancy resulting from those rate offerings. I always find it a bit of a paradox. Revenue managers are persistently trying to push rate during high demands, but it is literally the water on the fire as to optimizing that demand cycle. And most, if any, I have actually met very few, I'd say two. Yes. Yeah, Colin. Yep. Two that actually calculated variance on rate offers to demand cycle. I see it, and I've complained about this in a previous show, that when you see rate opportunity, people calculate that if we raise rate X number of more dollars at the current pace, we'll hit this weather bell of revenue. And what they don't realize is they just poured water on a growing fire and put it out, that by raising the rates, they literally killed the revenue arc that could have happened on that date had they just maintained the rate that they were asking for, not exacerbated it. If they calculated what they lost by the revenue gain, or they even do this as, this is the part I'm complaining about. If they calculated the diminished demand by rate increase compared to the rate maintenance to the same demand pace they were experiencing, compared the delta between those two, they would find more often than not that a persistent quality rate strategy beats the few conversions of revenue that you get at the higher rate compared to the bulk of revenues that you could have gotten for maintaining the rate. Now, this goes to the strategy goals of whether you're looking at top line revenues and or occupancy ratios compared to ADR ratios. In a nutshell, what is your goal for your RevPAR and what is your goal for your ADR goals in your market? If you're a tier 3 out of 5 rate, you're going to probably have a different perspective than a tier 3 out of occupancy for your market. For those that handle it, you know what I'm talking about. Those who are saying, what the hell is he talking about? It's basically star reports and how do you perceive yourself in your market comp set in your market, but revenue conversation. So talk to you about the fact that you now have really good means in a GA4 environment to define your marketing strategies and the potential value propositions they could produce because you're augmenting them with all this new capabilities that you didn't have before. On top of that, you have to begin to calculate the strategic value of shifting these engagements into your direct dialogue. I would say direct channel, but people have very vague and sometimes contrasting definitions of what's in a direct booking channel. Sometimes they throw in things that aren't perceived by others as direct booking channel contributions because that's how they see it or that's how their company sees it. All in all, the idea of throwing in conversions into your direct channel, I make one definition about direct channel. Can you continue to engage with the guest via the medium of the initial purchase? If you can, it is a direct channel. If you cannot, it is not a direct channel. What throws things in direct channel, outside of direct channel? Wholesalers, consortias, OTAs, anybody that is in between you and your guest in communication from the booking itself is not a direct channel. Walk-ins are a direct channel, just to give you some perspective to that. The group blocks, technically group sales, unless you're doing individual allowance of bookings, where if it's not group block booking, is not a direct channel, even though they're directly staying. And once they get in, you have the folio. At that point, it's a different story. But the actual conversion of purchase, where it's bought by bulk, hence the wholesale and consortia issues, then no, it's not, because you don't have direct license to continue to communicate from the inception of purchase with the guest directly. Some allow you some conduit, but usually it's because of a third-party engagement. You don't get to have that direct rapport with the guest. So with that in mind, the idea of throwing in business to your direct channel where you have the ability to communicate with your guests is the real value proposition we were so adamant about last week about lifetime value, because you have to calculate, even on the simplest of terms, the frequency of that return guest. Even if it's just one more, it's doubled your income for whatever it is. And I say that double meaning if they came back the same way they stayed the first time. Okay. And at least it has a modifier of cost or value to it because of any secondary stay that they have, let alone the multiplier frequency that you should acquire for it. That if you do a good job in service and quality and cost and everything else from the guest perspective, their repeatability is there. How often, okay, is an averaging, but in all honesty, any additional second or third visit is a contribution to the cost associated with acquiring it the first visit. And that's a missed commodity in most people's cost comparison discussions. They look at channels and the idea of what costs in comparison to another cost. I get often asked about metasearch programs versus OTA programs, and they refer to it as a cost factor. Well, the cost that I have to pay in OTA commissions compared to the cost of running an OTA marketing or a metasearch marketing campaign, it's as much money out of my pocket. You know what? You're right. And on that merit alone, you're not good enough to know that you anyway. No, the idea of it is that they're only looking at the negative aspect of how much did I spend on this versus this. Oh yeah, the revenue's still there. It's still there. So if it's costing me the same, why should I go through this whole process, having it my own metasearch program, going through the setups and the monthly fees and so forth, and have the variables of performance when all I have to do for OTAs is pay for the performance of what they make. The idea is that you're not calculating the value relationship between the two. The fact that you're now putting their engagement in a direct line with you, that you can nurture and grow and expand what they buy with you, the durability with you, that maybe they extend their stay with you, they buy ancillary products with you based on what you offer for them, your communication with them. And of course, the huge value that if you're successful in all your operations and they have the experience that you promised them at the value that they perceived, and your operations team did a great job of it, the residual value of a re-engagement of that guest to come back again. Because even if you did spend more money to put yourself back front of mind with them, the cost of your email campaigns or the cost of your reminder campaigns via ads and so forth that are targeted specifically to them because you can, as being a previous guest, their engagement into your newsletters and all the other things that go along with the engagement processes through via CRM and so forth. Even if you had incremental value cost associated with those, the down pricing, that the initial cost to get them into your funnel of direct channel goes down geometrically the more they continue to have the lifetime value relationship with you. That every time they come back, even if it's lesser than what they first acquired, even if it's fractional compared to what they first purchased, is a diminishment of the cost relationship of that first acquisition. And that is not measured when people do that. Well, why should I get off OTAs and do my own metasearch program? As an example, because they don't calculate that lifetime value proposition. And if they say, well, they may never come back again, they were only once in a lifetime, this was a bucket list stay with us and so forth. Great. You're also still forgetting is that they talk to people, and the success of your services, your product resonates with them when they go back with their friends and family. Like, we'll never go back there again because that was our bucket list thing to do. But man, if you're going to do like that, you got to stay there because they did this, this, and this. And the influencer value, you love the buzzword, take the reality. The influencer value of that is profound. Beyond the lifetime value that the individual is providing you, the influence on others and the incremental cost of that is fractional compared to other ways of new introductions and new markets and starting up and discovery and aspirational phases and all the other costs that go along with so many channels. That influencer factor where they're seeking you out because of the engagement that one guest had through the cost of their single acquisition, if they did nothing else afterwards, is still profound on lifetime value calculations. And yes, you can still calculate that as well. So in this process of defining proper marketing budgets and ways to do this, you approach it from the aspect of the channel's contribution, the cost of those conversions, the values of those conversions, the complete combination of all those channels. And then you go into your GA4 to get that data, and then redefine the value of the data by defining usages of that data. Like we said, GA4 is more about an audience building than it is about analytics. Improve your calculations of conversions and values of odds with those channels. Then lay that over to the revenue information that you have on your rates, your sources of business, your feeder markets, the things that are traditionally revenue management venues. Take those into play, and then calculate what it will take to produce at the levels that you've discovered and defined channel contribution and conversion values and cost of conversions. What it would take in infusion of budget for the time blocks that you're looking for, months, quarters, whatever, to produce the level of revenue that it needs to contribute at for it to be successful. Now, the one metric I haven't put in that discussion is the historical channel contribution percentage. You could knock it out of the park with a metasearch program, but if your metasearch program is only contributing 5%, it is only 5% of your top line revenue, because that's its contribution. So yes, it'd be wonderful to make it 50%, but it's only going to be 5%, maybe 10%, whatever. This is when you start calculating the revenue stress tests that I talked about revenue modeling, forecast, doing the modeling in comparison to forecasting, where you're modeling if this channel contributed this much compared to this much, what would impact what that would make based on its cost and everything else. That modeling is the part we talked about in last week's show. So you have a channel contribution percentage. Now you can have goals to increase those percentages, and you have goals to decrease other more costly channels like OTAs, like GDSs that have a high fixed cost or high variable cost to them. And so you reduce those. In lieu of what channel do you plan on replacing those with or cannibalizing them from? But those percentages is what you do. And I have a calculator. We use it with our clients all the time. I've created a calculator that if you give me channel contributions, channel costs, and history points I need between ADRs and historical occupancies, and I try to even just do it on an annual basis to go show gross numbers for an annual value proposition. It's a calculator. It works. It gives you proportionate values of what you should spend in marketing, what you should spend in other places that will contribute the values that you need to hit the revenue numbers that you're looking for. You're creating it from a revenue goal system, the cost factors that define the budget. Now, in the show's notes, I have bullet points similar to what we had as bullet points in show 418, breaking down. In show 418, we actually broke down how to fix a broken budget and the same classifications, okay, of the identification, measurement updates, comp set insights, redefine goals, so forth and so on. The same modalities exist in our discussion today about how to create a proper marketing budget. So even though we showed in show 418 how to fix a broken budget, the same modalities of segmentations, identifications, and usabilities apply to constructing a proper marketing budget. If you want to destruct it a certain way, you can rebuild it a certain way. So I'm literally putting those notes into the show notes. Look at it as kind of a benchmarking, weather vane kind of perspective of how to approach the projects. A lot of the feedback, as I've been talking about the staging of my past 3 shows, that's where I've been getting so much feedback from the emails, Loren at Hospitality Digital Marketing, from the hdm.news/talkback, because people are asking about progression of discussion. They're starting the process, but then they hit a wall of, okay, I remember this part, but I don't remember this part. So it's been fun. We've had it on the Hospitality Marketing Club discussions as well, where a lot of discussions about what next and how. With the context that some people that are on the club, they do this for a living, so they're not out to improve their competitors. They're there for peer support and guidance in the sense of go that way instead of this way, but they're not there to fix it for you. I've had those kind of discussions like, hey, can you just tell me whether it's this, and this is like kind of what I get paid to do. So I'm happy you're thinking like this. The pieces of the puzzle are sitting in front of you. You just have to put the jigsaw together. This is the direction you need to go, but I can't fix it for you and not think that I'm not going to say, well, we should sign a contract and do a deal. But that's another. But the point I'm making was the Hospitality Marketing Club, that peer group of dialogue with that is where most of that comes from. So you can send me an email if you have a follow-up as to clarifications and understandings. Happy to take that. Of course, on the podcast today, we're going to go in, dive deep on how to create some of these things, some of the tools that can be used to identify these things, and then the techniques of using that. So that will be our follow-up of our podcast for the show today as well. Obviously, I'm also going to take, and this was out of recommendation, thank you actually, For someone in France actually suggested this, and I said, thank you so much. And for that reason, I'll also translate it in French. God, I love AI, and that comes to that. Is we're going to take the past four shows and we're going to put them into article format, chapter format, and then chapter format. We're going to put it together. We're going to slap it out as a publication. Email me, Loren at Hospitality Digital Marketing. I'll send you a free copy. I will be putting it out as I've done the other books that we've been doing on open distribution where people pay to get them. It's not that expensive. This one probably $9.99, and it'll be a follow up. And we do have the second book coming out this year. Also, well, it's the part of summer for our first book that if you got it, you get the second book and the third book for. That's a progression of taking our shows and our podcast and putting it into digestible how-to format in a book. So it's there too. Just look for, actually just go to Hospitality Digital Marketing and also hospitalitychannel.tv. That's where we have all of our Live Love Lucy rerun shows of our live show and our podcast and so forth. And this content is also going to be on the paid wall behind our TV station. You know, the show is, everybody knows that watches is on it. It's free to watch. We do have a pay gateway. I think it's $4.99 a month to get to the content behind it. We have a lot of product reviews and how-tos and things from restaurants to hotels. A lot of fun content. Happy to have people join us on that. But the show notes, which will be on Hospitality Digital Marketing and on hospitalitychannel.tv, and also on our app, Hospitality Channel, Apple iOS and Google Play, we'll have the notes about a progression of content to how to create a proper marketing budget with the GA4 data. So with that, I think I have exacerbated the conversation to the degree I was hoping for. I do sincerely appreciate your time and attention to this. And for those that are watching the recast of this at better time zones for you, we try to do this 11:30 a.m. Wednesdays Sydney time and 11:30 a.m. Wednesdays UK time. I hope that you get to enjoy, and that they'll cover our Middle East friends as well. So with that, my name is Loren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.